Hey, what's up? Welcome to Pastor's Perspective. I'm your host, Brian Perez. It is Tuesday, the 13th of May, and here we are, live until 4 o'clock to answer the questions you have about the Bible, the Christian faith, just about anything that's on your mind. You can give us a call at 888-564-6173. Hello to you guys and gals watching us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. We appreciate you being there and watching and chatting with each other there. But if you want to chat with us, the best thing to do is to call at 888-564-6173. You can get answers to your Bible questions today. And here to answer your question, we've got author and apologist, Dr. Bobby Conway, the pastor of Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. We have several seats in the studio. We could have an author, an apologist, a pastor, but we have all three in one with Bobby Conway. How are you, Bobby?
That's funny, Brian. Good to see you, bud.
Yeah, good to see you too. And what do you guys want to talk about? You can also send in your questions online. There's a few methods. You can go to the Pastor's Perspective Facebook and send something in on Messenger, or go to the Pastor's Perspective Instagram and DM us, or you can do what our first person did, prefers to remain anonymous. We honor that. And here's the question. Recently, I heard a church... what did this person do? They went to kwave.com. They found the Pastor's Perspective page. They filled out the form, and that got sent in to us. And here's what this person wants to know. Recently, I heard about a church in Florida. Decided to do some research about it on my own. I read a few reviews, found one of them particularly disturbing. Here's what it said. The campus is fenced in with a guard shack. There was security and a heavy presence at the entrance. Metal detectors and bag checks were in place at the door. During the service, there was heavy security on the stage and throughout the building. I'm a true believer and feel all of this is completely unnecessary and alarming. What are your thoughts, Bobby?
Well, I could understand the concern. At the same token, I would react a little bit to the phrase that all of this is unnecessary. I think that when you're in a pastoral position, that you owe it to the flock to make sure that, safety protocols are in place. But what she's describing, I could understand it being over the top, but at the same token, I don't know the situation there. So, for example, what if there's been numerous death threats on the pastor's life? Or what if there have been some unstable people sending messages to the church? I don't think it's enough to say, I just have faith in God. Yes, have faith in God, but we also should use wisdom as well. And I think that is good to have a security protocol. Typically, the larger the church gets, the more some of that stuff does get beefed up in presence. I know when I pastored a church and it grew large, we had a security team as well. And it was for the purpose of looking out for things, just to be on the alert. And there's plenty of churches, and we read about it every week, that had they had some type of security in place, perhaps things could have been protected. So I'm sure at some point you lose faith and you just operate out of fear. But at the same token, faith and wisdom are meant to be friends. And so I think that if somebody just goes to the point where it's just complete trust and there's threats around, well, you'd feel horrible. And especially, like I think about in my situation as a pastor, to ignore certain threats that happen in the culture and just do nothing about it. There's different types of protocols, even for workers. You have security stuff that they got to go through for background checks to make sure you're not putting pedophilias in place, or there's a number of type of things that you have to do. But the metal detectors, I get it. I mean, that can sound a bit alarming. We are meeting in a gym
Literally
where our
alarming.
church plant is, Brian, and they told us that they're going to be installing metal detectors, and we're going to have to run all of our equipment through it, and
wow.
all the church is going to have to go through it. And I'm sympathetic to the questioner in that way. It sounds like a total beatdown. I think about TSA. Sometimes I wonder, for all that we do, the steps that we take, the amount of time that that would be like a question of ethics, right? Okay, you've spent billions of dollars in TSA and protocol and cost countless hours of time. If we were to vote on it as American people, do we want to spend money that way and use our time that way at airports? Or would we rather have a little less structure, knowing that from time to time, we all take the risk of maybe our plane being blown up? But, we get more time on our hands. I'm glad I don't have to make that decision, but those are the kind of things that people have to think about.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that the person who sent this in on kwave.com is thinking what I'm about to say, but there might be people who are against all these extra security measures at churches and everything, but yet at night they lock the doors to their home, they lock their car, they lock their garage, all this other stuff to make sure there's no theft or burglary or whatever. But when it comes to a church, I guess they're thinking maybe it could be off-putting to some people. Like some people will show up, and if they have to go through a metal detector, they might decide, well, I'm not going to go to church, forget it. I mean, we're so used to it nowadays, I don't think anybody would turn away from going to a church just because they saw a metal detector or something like that. If anything, they might feel safer.
You might feel safer, or you might, I would, if I went to a church where there's metal detectors, I probably would be curious, like, hey, what's with the metal detectors? So I wouldn't make an assumption. I'd want to know the story that led to that, and if somebody said, oh man, we've had several unstable people making threats and we just felt like we owed it to our flock to protect them, and we hate that we have to do this, but we couldn't live with ourselves if we were passive in that. I think, man, I totally get that. And, I appreciate that, but you're exactly right. I think sometimes when it comes to church and the spiritual life, like, do we operate consistently like that in other arenas of our life, right? Like, do we leave our doors open? And, when it comes to the church, let's get it as cheap as possible. Let's keep it as minimalistic as possible. Let's not have to do a big investment in that. Let's not raise a lot of funds for that. When it comes to our home, let's go to the nines on upgrades. Let's get all the luxury, so you see these things, right, that we can do sometimes. So when people start applying that same stuff in the church, it's like, oh, we're not being frugal. And sometimes that is the case, right? There's opulence, but then there's just, hey, we just don't want to be generous as well.
Yeah. Maybe we should just put signs in front of our churches to tell potential bad guys that, hey, we don't allow guns on campus. There's a grocery store I go to, and they have a sign at their front door. It says, guns are not allowed in this store. And I'm thinking, is that really going to deter somebody from going in and whatever? But yeah, it is what it is.
If you're going to go in and, shoot some people with a gun and your morals are already in that place, then you're not allowed to bring a gun in the store. Is not going to do much to alter that. But maybe it's for the people that are carrying and they just put that sign up because maybe they'll put it in the car because you never know if they'll have some kind of an altercation with somebody and would have used it and they didn't plan to.
Yeah.
But it's tough, right? All these questions.
Questions we weren't answering just a few years ago. Ain't that the truth? All right. Thanks for writing in on the kwave.com Pastor's Perspective page. Let's go to the phones now. 888-564-6173 is the number to call to talk to Dr. Bobby Conway. And here's Mary in Anaheim. Hi there, Mary. Welcome to Pastor's Perspective. What's your main question for us today?
Hi. Love all you brothers. I came to the Lord with Chuck Smith in the tent.
Awesome.
So been with you guys a long time. And I have a question if I should seek other fellowship. I have been going to a church for about 20 years, even went to their Bible school. And a couple of years ago, I started being shunned because I advocated all the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and I believe I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma by 3 doctors, and they don't believe in that healing, and they don't believe in much of the gifts. A lot of the duality that I saw, according to Witness Lee, also spoke in tongues, and then he changed his whole perspective on it because it was out of control, he said. They condemn Christianity, quote unquote, and yet they call themselves Christians. I say they because I kind of don't identify that much with them. They do.
Wait, so the church you're going to now identifies as Christians, but yet puts Christians down?
Continually.
In what way? Give us one example of what they do.
Just talking about Christianity being so corrupted, and that they're the only kind of true church that is being recovered.
Yeah. Bobby, what do you say to Mary?
Well, it definitely sounds problematic. Again, I would want to know what's leading to the statements that they're saying. Being a pastor myself, it's tough because I know sometimes people misinterpret me. It happens frequently where you try to communicate and people hear one thing and it's not what I'm saying. And so there's times where I talk about the church as, corrupt at large. There's just lots of progressive Christianity going on. There's lots of just immorality. So, I think that it sounds like, you're a mature believer. And if you're discerning some of these things, I do think it's, always good to ask questions. It sounds like you've already done some of that. And if it's not a good fit, then that's okay. I think that you just take the path of praying for the church and explaining why you're leaving. But if they're, saying things that the church is corrupt, but they're referring to things like I just did, then that's not necessarily putting the church down. It's stating facts that there's a lot of corruption going on in the church. Not believing in all the gifts of the Spirit, that would be a make or break issue for some. It wouldn't be for me. I could be in a church that, practices it more than others, but I'd be more cautious about going to a church that is so heavy on it that I'm in a context where I'm walking around a bunch of people telling me God told me 5 times a day. I get nervous around that kind of a Christian too, because sometimes that's just an emotional person. They're thinking that they got this stream of conscious where God's just telling them to get rye toast instead of white. And I don't always trust that. And I've been burned on some issues in regards to that. But I'm also skeptical like you if it's like, hey, there is more. And a lot of times, I'm trying to speak out, like it sounds like I'm trying to come to a balance, but then I don't always know what the balance is. What if I'm just fearful of more of the gifts or myself? So these are questions that we always have to do some introspection on. But it's just some thoughts on leaving a church in general. How do you go about that? And what would be a right time? I think that it's important that we don't jump ship right away, that you begin by making observations as you did, then you ask questions as you did. Then if you feel like you're philosophically off or theologically off, or there's been a moral lapse, or they won't utilize you in your giftings in the church, then I think that those are valid reasons then. And then I think it's also appropriate to just share that you're leaving. And one of the things that a wise pastor once said to me, when people leave the church, he says, there's a reason that people give you and the reason that they actually leave. And I just wish people would tell me why they're really leaving, because so often it's some kind of a smoke screen that people give because they're non-confrontive. But if they would have given me the real reason, which I often find out after the fact, well, we were actually working on the same thing that they were concerned on behind the scenes. Or wow, we would have loved that insight. That was a really good point. And here they felt led to go leave, and we would have been teachable. So I think that sometimes I have such a heart for pastors because I've listened to so many people come to our church. And my first thought, too, is a lot of times when somebody comes to our church and then they want to tell me about how bad their past church is, I'm immediately thinking, well, just wait till we burn you. I guess this is the way it goes. So I have a real heart for pastors. I think they get misread. They're burnout. They've been disillusioned by people that don't stand by them. It's just tough. And yet I'm also disillusioned with pastors, and I'm one. So I guess I'm just disillusioned with people, and I think that's why we got to keep our faith in Jesus.
Now, Bobby, you just said something right now. Let me get you to clarify. You said if a church isn't using or doesn't want to use you in ministry despite the gifts you have, what did you say? Or did I misunderstand you? What did you say? And there's a reason I'm asking.
I think that all of us are called to help build the local church up. And if somebody is desiring to use their spiritual gifts to edify the flock, and they just get shut down and there's no place for them to serve, then that's a tough spot. And so I think everybody should have a place to serve. But I also think that sometimes people come to the church and they want to define how that's going to look.
Yes.
And that's not the way it should work either.
Right.
I think a pastor and a person that's come to the church, they should be working together. And if somebody wanted to serve, because what often happens is somebody has a certain passion and then they want me to be just as passionate about their passion, but I'm overseeing the whole. I can't do that. And I also have to see how their passion fits into the whole of the vision that we have. And so that's where alignment comes in. And so if there's ministry alignment, philosophical alignment, doctrinal alignment, alignment around vision, those are good things. You trust your leaders. If none of those are there, then you start asking questions.
Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying, because I was thinking somebody might say, well, I have the gift of singing and my church won't let me sing in the choir. And in reality, this person cannot sing. They just think they can sing. Their parents didn't tell them that, no, that's not your gifting. And they get all mad because they can't use their gift in front of the church. Or somebody who thinks, well, I've got the gift of preaching and teaching. I should be able to teach on Sunday nights, and when the pastor takes a Sunday off, they should call on me to do it. And then they don't get called, and they just say, forget it, I'm leaving.
Yeah, and that's a tough thing. I can remember I had to have that conversation early on in my ministry with a person, and he just couldn't sing. And he loved singing, but the problem is we didn't love listening. And I told him, I said, look, I appreciate your heart, and I think God does too, but it's a distraction with putting you on stage and having you sing. Now, that's not easy to share, but when you're a leader, you either put people in their proper gifted place, or you just let people do that, and everybody else is wondering what's wrong with the leadership. Like, how are they allowing this to happen? Like this, like you wouldn't want somebody to get up and teach that just see, when somebody gets up and they're learning to teach, you can tell there's some gifting there. That's great. There's going to be some bumps in the road. But then when somebody gets up to teach and they're just like a deer in the headlights and they're scared to death, and it's clear that the gifting's not there. Well, now what happens is we're all worried for the person in the audience, and we're going into, Lord, help this brother out. It makes us uncomfortable. So when people are in their gifts, everybody's more comfortable, but people need opportunities to grow into their gifts as well.
Very true. And by the way, Bobby, I've gotten over the fact when you told me that I couldn't sing in front of your church. So we're cool. We're still friends. Mary, thank you for calling today on Pastor's Perspective. Peter, we're waiting for you to call because Paul is on the phone too. Peter, Paul, and Mary. Paul from Crestline, thank you for calling 888-564-6173. How can we help you today?
Well, thanks, Brian, and thank you, Dr. Bobby. And I bow to your wisdom and knowledge. That's why I'm asking questions.
Oh, thank you.
I was doing a word study on wine and strong drink because I heard a pastor say something that I didn't think was right. But that's part of my second question. But the first question is, I was using the Strong's Exhaustive Concordance to do the word study. And when I was looking in the Old Testament, I saw a book that I am not familiar with, not that I certainly don't know everything, but it's called the Book of Canticles. And I found it in the index because what I saw was CA, and it was between Ecclesiastes and Isaiah. And it was CA, and I couldn't think about what in the world book is that. So I looked at
California.
And there it is. Well, that was what I first thought. I go, what in the world? And then I looked and saw this Canticles. I thought, well, maybe it was on one of the apocryphal books, but the 14 apocryphal books, I did not see it in those books.
Mm-hmm.
And I am not familiar with it, so I said, okay, well, maybe Dr. Bobby or Brian can answer it for me.
All right. Bobby, do you know anything about this book? And then how does it relate to your question about wine?
It was just something I was looking through when I was in this section of wine, no, I guess it was strong drink, and there it was, and because I was looking through the books because it goes in book order,
mm-hmm.
and I stopped while I was doing the word study, and I go, what is that?
Yeah, you didn't even get a chance to finish your word study because you came across something you weren't familiar with. Bobby, what do you know about the Canticles or Canticles?
Yeah, the Canticles, it sounds like you might have a liturgical Bible. This isn't actually part of the Bible, but the Canticles are like prayers that are part of liturgy in an Anglican or Catholic church. And so in certain places, maybe in the scriptures, right, in the Psalms or in some of the prophets and other spaces, you'll see a reference to Canticles, and then that would be kind of a spark for a liturgical moment. And so that sounds like what you ran into there to me.
Oh, okay. I understand that because I looked at other references in the Old Testament, and it was like they were Psalms or Proverbs even.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I was not.
That would be used in corporate worship and as part of the liturgy in an Anglican or Catholic church. And so they've kind of thought through different ways to have a scripture reading followed by some form of prayer or a hymn or worship that goes up to God. And if you're watching an Anglican or a Catholic priest facilitate a service, then you'll see at different points them lean into these canticles.
You know, that reminds me, Bobby, I recently saw, the new Pope was, elected, sworn in? I don't know how that works, but we've all been seeing about Pope Leo, and they showed that the first prayer that he gave, and he kind of did it in song. It's like he was singing this prayer. And is that something that they do often?
Yes, that is something that you'll see, like priests do in church and stuff. Now, I haven't been to a lot of Catholic services, but I would go as a kid sometimes. My grandparents were Catholic, and I would go because I would get the maple donut with the peanuts splashed on top, and that would work.
You haven't changed much, have you?
It was completely foreign experience.
All right, Paul, does this answer your questions?
Yeah. Oh, yes. I appreciate that. For reference, though, Dr. Bobby, where I found this Canticles was in the index part of the Strong's Concordance. And
okay.
I have no experience with Catholicism or the Anglican faith.
Sure. Yeah, Strong's might have just expanded it to include, references for those that, need something broader than the Bible as it relates to service. I haven't come across that myself, but, Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I will say, as it relates to the high church appeal, there is something. I told my wife, even myself, that I get I get this appeal. You know, Tom Holland is not a believer, but he has done a lot to help with his historical writings on Christianity and its influence in culture. And what's interesting is he goes to church, but what he's at, what when asked what to make sure you keep in the church, what draws him, he says, is the weird, is all the high church, the sense of transcendence. And it's interesting to hear what's happening in the UK. They're experiencing an extreme surge of people attending church again. And in particular, you got a lot of people going to kind of more your high church and then even your Pentecostal flavors. But in the high church, people are, and young people are wanting, like even in UK, they want the King James. They want a sense of something old, like they've grew up where they're getting updated apps every 2 or 3 days. Everything's getting refreshed, and they just want a sense of old. And so I was listening to that and thinking about what I told my wife. I was like, even if I could have a church building, if God would provide like an old traditional church, and then I'd slap like some metal doors on it and leave a few of the pews periodically throughout. And yet, so it's kind of the ancient future vibes. I do think there's something beautiful about that. But if you think that you're just going to church and worshiping because you got incense kind of in the mix and you've got somebody singing a canticle or you have a liturgical read back, for me, if I went into that kind of a church, it's going to be great to see some of that. But the bigger question is, how are the lives in the church? And if lives aren't changed, but they just like the sense of transcendence, then that's not, what we're really after. But I do think there's something beautiful. And I expect that we're going to see more people in the future. Like, so much of the church growth was all about go out, find out what the community wants, find out what they would find offensive, make sure you strip all that away, make it just as comfortable as possible. And now what's happening is some people want to feel like they're stepping out of their comfort zone. They want to feel like they're not walking into something normal. They want to feel like they're walking into something that feels transcendent, that's different, otherworldly. And it's so crazy the way culture changes. But you think about it, Brian, and it makes perfect sense in a world with all these new app updates. People just want something that feels consistent. Yep. And like the church isn't always trying to change and update it and reface itself every time culture does.
Yeah, I remember hearing something a while ago, if I can remember all the details, it was something about how younger people, millennials and stuff, I don't even know the different age groups anymore, but they're going to churches, but they're looking for, the David Jeremiahs, the Chuck Swindolls, the Jack Grahams, the Chuck Smiths. Of course, Chuck went to heaven 11 years ago, but, it's not so much that they're looking for something hip and relatable or anything like that. They just want to find something that's a little more consistent, and they appreciate the fact that David Jeremiah has been doing this for 60 years now, and they would rather sit in a church like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I grew up, like in California in the contemporary church movement, and man, I certainly wouldn't want to. I mean, this is one of the things we don't want to criticize these different pieces of time because, there's different strategies for the moment, and we want to make sure that in this moment that we can understand some of the reasons why people might be thinking something like this now. And so you celebrate any way we can get the gospel out, and maybe there's something pretty cool in the mix, because what's happened in the UK, I just want that to sweep over and happen here.
Yes, indeed. Lord, let it happen. Thank you. Who was that? That was Paul. Thank you for calling in today with your questions here on Pastor's Perspective. And it's time for us to take a break. We'll be back with more of your questions. Author and apologist Dr. Bobby Conway. Don't forget to follow his new YouTube channel. It's called The Graphite Apologist. In fact, Bobby, your next assignment is to draw your next church building. Well, we want to see what it would look like, like an older sanctuary with
That'd be cool.
metal bars. Let's look at what it looks like. 888-564-6173. We are back on Pastor's Perspective. Thanks so much for joining us on the radio or maybe online on Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram. We're also on podcast. If you ever miss any of our episodes, you can follow us on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Like I said, Facebook, YouTube. Make sure you click that little bell icon and subscribe, and then that way you'll get notified every time we do something live, which is basically every Monday through Friday from 3 to 4 p.m. Pacific time. I'm Brian Perez, and author and apologist Dr. Bobby Conway is here. He's the pastor of Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's also the Graphite Apologist on YouTube. Go look for that when you get a chance. And let's take some more calls now. 888-564-6173 is our number. And let's go to Scott, who's listening to us in Huntington Beach on the K-Wave app. Hi there, Scott. Thanks for downloading the app and thanks for calling in today.
Yeah, good afternoon. I have an issue here. My wife and I have been married 30 years, and there's a division in our marriage, and it's doctrine related. We stopped going to church together. She has gone down the path of a man on YouTube, and he basically, it's the I don't know, is it called the seed of Satan? That where Eve had offspring by having sex with Satan, and I just can't wrap my brain around any of this, and I can't. I've tried. But that ministry looks a little cultish to me.
A little?
And I can't. That's just putting it politely. I can't seem to have. I've prayed and prayed and prayed, and I haven't had any breakthrough. I don't know how to refute it.
Yeah, Bobby, what advice would you give to Scott?
Oh boy, yeah, this is tough. So I would say, you know, on one side, just remembering that this is your bride, it's your wife, and I would try to, uh, you know, keep the person before the problem in this situation. Um, I would I would remember that you know, she's probably meaning well, and this is some deception. Obviously, it's not something that is a position that is going to be able to, stand up to scholarship and scrutiny. But it is unfortunate because what you've said is you don't feel it, she's feeling it, and now you're not in church together. And so, what does that even look like? Well, I would say, just from a relationship standpoint, our battle's not against flesh and blood. It seems like the enemy's got a foothold in here. There's some deception, and if you can try to just focus on loving her, being tender toward where she's at, not taking it personal, because it's so easy to do that when this stuff goes down. And I just think about, even in my own life, going through all these doubts for years that I was in, and that was challenging on the marriage for sure, because my wife saw me in despair over my doubts, and we just weren't aligned on some of where I was at. But you know what? Keeping that marriage intact is first and foremost. So I think that, you know how bought in she is. And if she's so bought in that you can't do anything, and you feel like you've had the discussions, then it's going to have to be something. You don't want to be in a situation where you're constantly nagging at her about it, or she's nagging at you about being a part of it. Because if she doesn't believe the way you believe, or you don't believe the way she does, you just can't force that, because that's going to create relational trauma to one another. But what you can do is try to figure out how to renegotiate what marriage looks like. And I would say, what are the things that you do agree on, about God, about, some of these things, and focus on where you agree, and pray around the areas of disagreement, and hope in time it'll resolve, so you're not just constantly bringing it up. And then also, I don't know how far down the pathway, I would suggest getting very familiar with what this teaching is, and asking if she's willing to kind of go on a journey and say, I think if it sounds like you're trying to be open, but I can spare you the time. You don't want to go down that pathway. There's a lot of toxicity that is in, the seed of Satan, serpent theology that comes out of that. But yeah, just try not to panic, try not to freak out. She's in a different space, and I'm sure that's disruptive to your marriage, but it doesn't have to be the end of your relationship. It really doesn't. Who knows where things will go over time. What would end the relationship is just strong arming each other into where you're at. And having went through this long season of doubt, the Bible says, be merciful to those who doubt, in the book of Jude. The enemy is involved. There's different reasons why certain ideas are latching on. But hopefully she would just be open to, maybe if you could both agree, we want to know what the Bible best teaches, and then getting some good resources to kind of move in that direction.
Now, Bobby, you said that Scott's wife might be well-meaning and, looking into this. Here's what I'm wondering. Could it be also that there's a lot of people who follow these outlandish theories that have just exploded on social media, but they follow them because maybe there's this sense of, I don't think my church is telling me the whole truth. Surely the Bible can't be the only thing. There's got to be something else out there. I mean, we read our Bible and sometimes we have questions because something's not specific, and then somebody else comes along with quote unquote specifics, and people start following that path.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, all truth is God's truth, right? So it's not like only going to have to find truth in the Bible. And when I say all truth is God's truth, what I mean is He created us as people that can discover truth, right? And so, if we can discover how to build a boat and the principles that frame that, there's plenty of people that weren't Christians that invented things that we can use that are true, but when it comes to this particular doctrine, the problem is there's nowhere you just can't even find it in the Bible that Satan, number one, some people aren't even sure that the serpent was Satan. I think Revelation backs it up, and I hold to that. But there's even argumentation about who the serpent was. That opens up another door. But again, I think Revelation does make that clear that the serpent is Satan, but at the same token, then to say that Satan copulated with Eve makes no sense, because all it says in that moment is that the serpent is going to be judged by going down on its belly. So there's no children yet, right? So if you have Adam and Eve and there's no children when the temptation happens, and then the judgment happens, and Satan or the serpent is put to his belly, so to speak. And in other words, first off, Satan doesn't have, hope. He's not procreating with humanity in this situation. Now, there's the Nephilim story that is another discussion, but that's post Eve if you take that route. When you're with Eve, it says that after that, you go to chapter 4, and then who's born? Well, Cain and Abel. From who? Well, Adam and Eve, not the serpent. And you don't even hear about the serpent for a little while. So this is a complete mythology that you would have to build out and erect, and it's completely erroneous. And then some of the other, depending upon which breed of it, to claim that Jews or members of non-white races are descendants of Cain and the serpent, this gets into some really horrific stuff. So I would run as fast as I could away from it if I was her. As somebody I just think about I'd love the person that is engaged in this to call up. He's not going to have a biblical leg to stand on. Mm. I mean, these people aren't going to be able to go and debate your philosophers and apologists and theologians. It's just idiocy. It's empty. It's not substantive. But sadly, Brian, people do get caught up in some of this stuff, and people buy into it. And we're vulnerable when we don't know a lot. Mm-hmm. We're vulnerable when we do know a lot. But I think about as being an early believer. The LA Church of Christ. I have people on me in that movement. It was crazy, some of the things that I could have been derailed from because reading The Shack or not The Shack, the book by the Mormon, Embraced by the Light, mm-hmm. and thinking, no, this is an amazing book. Well, it seemed amazing to me, and then I learned later it was filled with Mormon theology. Mm-hmm. But God used it, and I think that He can take this season in your wife's life, and she can come out of it and be stronger for it.
That's for sure. So if everybody could please keep Scott and his wife in your prayers, that her eyes will be open, that this stuff is just weird. And again, I make my case for radio and K-Wave specifically, which is the station most of you are listening on right now. And we vet every pastor, every Bible teaching program that you hear on K-Wave is vetted. We don't just put anybody on. Now, that's different from YouTube because anybody can make a video, upload it with no authority, nobody looking or checking to see if the facts are true, so to speak, fact check it. But here on K-Wave, we make sure that everybody is legit. Now, that's not to say that if you don't hear someone on K-Wave that they're weird. that their doctrine is off. But if you do hear them on K-Wave, then we're okay with them. So if you're looking for a new podcast or something, check out our page, kwave.com. You can look at our program schedule there. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We've got solid Bible teaching, including this program here, Pastor's Perspective, weekday afternoons from 3 to 4. We also repeat it at 3 in the morning. And Bobby Conway is here most of these days on Pastor's Perspective, and he's also got a weekend program. So it's always good to hear what's going on here at K-Wave. Thank you, Scott, for calling in today at 888-564-6173. Here's a question that was sent in online. It's another marriage-type question. And let me see, what is it here? Here it is. Okay. Pastors, my wife and I have been friendly debating for many years about assurance of salvation. She quotes the scripture that says, "No one can snatch them from my hand." I see the scripture that says, "Some will depart the faith," and the verse about shipwrecked faith. She says no one is stronger than God, and therefore no one can pry God's hand open to remove someone's salvation. I say that God gave us free will, and if a person chooses to walk away from their faith, they can. Many people say that if someone walks away from their faith, they were never saved in the first place. I don't know if that's true, says this person who wrote in. So my question, if I repented of my sins, gave my life to Jesus, walked in faith with him, and then changed my mind, am I going to heaven, or is hell my destiny?
Yeah. Well, that's I say, he says, or she says.
He says, she says, yeah.
Yeah, that's the exact way it is. I mean, some say you can lose your salvation and others say you can't. And there's a reason why people say that, because there's verses that look like you can lose your salvation and there's verses that look like you can't lose your salvation. So then the question is, how do you put all that together? And I think that one approach is that some people would say that you can never lose your salvation, but there are plenty of people that will look saved, and in time they will walk away from the faith that they professed but never possessed in time. And you get in the parable of the sower and you can see this. So walking away from the faith that they professed but they didn't possess it. So just because somebody professes the faith doesn't mean they possess it long term, right? So that's the parable of the sower. So the genuine believer, he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. Philippians 1:6. He's the author and perfecter of our faith. But then the Bible says, make your calling and election sure, examine your faith, to make sure you're in it. And so those are just like warnings that we check our profession, by the production of fruit in our life. Like, do we believe? Or did I just say some prayer? Or did I just carry on for a little bit and fizzle out? And that's a hard thing to see, and you see it happen often. So I believe in eternal security. I don't believe a true believer loses their faith, but there are people that have walked away from the faith, Brian, and you hear their testimonies, and it can be compelling listening to, like, from somebody that went into a horrible season of doubt, and they'll say, "And I was infatuated with the Lord. I fasted, I prayed, I witnessed, I was totally involved in the church, and then doubts crept in, and I just don't believe it anymore." But for somebody to say I didn't believe would be wrong. Well, so did that person lose his or her salvation? And that can be, a challenge. But the way that you would land there is you would say, okay, then if you hold to a view that you can lose your salvation, then you're still going to be within orthodoxy as long as you don't believe that you have to earn it if you're, walking in it. So in other words, you're saved by grace, but because of God's respect for free will, he permits you to walk away. Like, no one's going to snatch him out of your hand, but if you decide to walk away, he'll respect your free will. That's the way that some people would come down on that. So those are kind of the viewpoints and the reasoning. What you can't say is it doesn't matter how you live, antinomianism, just I'm saved by by faith and I'm just going to send it all up. No, we better examine our life. And what you can't say is, I'm saved by works, I got to earn it. What seems to be the things that people can say is, yeah, I'm eternally secure, but if I walk away on my own free will, then I do. And it's not because I was being saved by works, it's just I no longer wanted the grace. Or you would say, God's going to persevere me in spite of myself. I am in the latter camp, but those testimonies can seem compelling at times, and that would be the answer if I get to heaven and find out that I was wrong.
You mentioned the parable of the sower, and I've always looked at that as, well, let me get your opinion. So the parable mentions 4 different types of people, and only one of them is the true one at the end of the day. So you could say 25% of people who profess to be Christians are really Christian, or I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah.
But then there's the verse that talks about the 10 lepers that were healed, and only one of them gave thanks, and so that brings it down to 10%. I mean, is there any truth to that? That there's a lot of people that are walking around professing faith, but they really aren't?
Unfortunately, I think there is. And that's a hard pill to digest, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about it, that's problematic. But it's only problematic to my emotions, because I want everybody to be in heaven, but not at the expense of altering the scripture to make it more suitable. I think that's an unloving thing for us to do, to not be honest with the scriptures and share these things that are in the Bible. Narrow's the way. Few who find it. I mean, there are verses in there that I think there's going to be a lot of people in heaven, but I think a lot of people are going to miss out, and that's a hard pill to digest right there. It's something that I just find comfort only in knowing that God's not willing that any should perish, that the judge of the earth will do what is right, and no one will be without excuse, and that God is unconditional in his love, and he's made himself known. And I just trust that. And what seems hard on this side of heaven to wrap my head around, I know that when I am in heaven, because I'll understand his justice more fully and our sin more fully, I'll understand that I shouldn't be in heaven even more deeply because of his unconditional love. And I'll understand why so many people missed it.
Yes, indeed. 888-564-6173. Let's go to Anaheim. Here is Karina. How can we help you today, Karina?
Hi, pastors. Well, I'm calling because my husband passed away 2 months ago. He did have a battle, but somebody took his life 2 months ago, and 2 months prior to him passing away, I seen a transformation in him. He still had the same struggle. He did have an addiction, but it was different. It was way different than before when, he was struggling his addiction. It was something different, and my question to you, Pastor, is because he did know Christ. Growing up, he did know God. He was a child of God growing up, but, he just met the wrong people and the wrong crowd. But he always believed in God, and, he just had one struggle, and we all have struggles, but I just would want to know, was he able to be saved, because I always did pray for his salvation. I really did.
What do you think, Bobby?
Well, this has got to be a horrific season that you're going through. Now, so sorry that you're having to feel this. It's just a reminder in this moment that there's hurting people around us all the time. And I know you have a long road ahead of you. It sounds like he was a bit of a tortured soul. As far as, his location, I would, if I was you, be taking comfort in the fact that he believed. We do fumble. We do need to examine our life. But what's also really cool about the parable of the sower is it says some produce fruit 30, 60, 100-fold. In other words, some don't produce that much, but some produce a lot. And we want to look at our life to see some fruit, but if you see a fruit tree and there's one lemon on it and it's alive, well, there's hope for that tree. You see a bunch of lemons on that thing's thriving. If you see a tree that never produced any fruit, then that's the problem. So, I would be thinking about how you saw evidence that it was more than just a statement that I believe in this historical moment, but this is some of the difference that belief made in his life. It informed the way that he thought about things or decisions that he made. And if you saw some fruit in that and he professed that, that's where I would be keeping my comfort. And ultimately, just trusting the Lord through all of this right now. And that's so much easier to say. I realize that, but you can drive yourself crazy on this whole destination thing, because at the end of the day, it's a walk of faith, and when people that we love die, and this is something that's comforting. When we do really live it, we don't leave questions in our fellow believing family and friends' mind about where we are when we die. In other words, our belief, when it's really lived out, that creates security at the funeral for those that knew us. But when somebody doesn't, it creates a certain insecurity, and you don't want to drive yourself crazy. But I can tell you, if I was in your shoes, I would be putting my hope in that. It's like my grandparents were Roman Catholic, and they went to church weekly, but I didn't really hear them talking about the Lord and the difference it makes. It was just kind of this moment that they had on Sunday, and you left church and there was no discussion about it. Like it just seemed like very religious, but not relational. And yet I still hope that in their own quiet way that it was true. And what else am I going to do? I don't want to imagine an existence without them in eternity. And I wish the same for you.
Satan comes to rob, steal, kill, and destroy, and he would want nothing more, I think, Karina, than to steal your joy and to have you pondering this day and night all the time. So yeah, just rest in the words that Bobby Conway just said right now. We are out of time. Thank you for joining us today on Pastor's Perspective. We're going to archive today's episode a little bit later on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, Facebook, YouTube. And we'll be back tomorrow between 3 and 4 p.m. Pacific time. If we didn't get to your question today, we can try to do it again tomorrow. We open up the phone lines about 7 minutes before 3 o'clock. For Dr. Bobby Conway, the graphite topologist on YouTube, I'm Brian Perez. Thanks for listening today and for watching Pastor's Perspective.